You probably start anytime.
Okay, I'll start. People can join us when they get here. Shall I start? Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Mimi Willard, President of the Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers. We're Marin's nonprofit taxpayer voter advocate, working for fairer taxes, fees, and representative government. As many of you are aware, normally we host a fall forum at this time of year featuring a prominent statewide speaker. That's a community event that's catered and free for all, thanks to a generous sponsor. It also generates donations that help sustain our efforts. Well, that's obviously not happening this year. So we're doing something new, which is today's educational Zoom forum on Prop 15. We hope that we will do more of this kind of thing in coming months. So if you find this valuable, please let us know. And also please consider a donation at costmarin.org. We are an all volunteer organization, and we are also always looking for people with any skill or capability that they might contribute, such as financial analysis, data dredge. Right now, we're especially interested in some help on social media, marketing, writing and electronic communications, and fundraising. So if you are interested, please send a message via our website, costmarin.org. So today's Zoom forum is a cost board team effort. Bruce Vogan is controlling, we hope, the Zoom operation. This is our maiden voyage webinar, so we hope it goes well, and please bear with us. Kingston Cole, another of our directors, is helping with the question queue. If you want to submit a question, click on the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit it. Our other directors helped us with guidance for today's forum and question input, and they include Doug Kelly, Laura Ethel, Paul Primo, and Karsten Anderson. So today's topic is Proposition 15, which is on your November ballot. This ballot initiative, commonly referred to as split roll, proposes the most significant change to California's property tax code in a generation. Per the Legislative Analyst's Office regarding Prop 15, quote, beginning in 2025, total property taxes from commercial land and buildings would be $8 billion to $12.5 billion higher in most years if this passes. These new revenues come from raising the tax assessment on most commercial and industrial properties. Public schools, community colleges, and municipalities are the designated beneficiaries. Cost has not yet taken a position on Prop 15. We might. If we were to, we would apply what we call our sensible tax criteria, which are posted on our website under the About section. And we use these criteria to arrive at a decision. Our criteria will guide us to consider, in this instance, the urgency of the need for more money, and also other considerations such as the fairness of the tax itself, the impact on business and consumers, alternative solutions for how the urgent need might be fulfilled. So our format today is that we have with us, and we're grateful to have with us for each side of this battle, a leading advocate who will start by providing up to 7 minutes of opening comments. After each of our panelists has completed opening comments, that will be followed by 3 minutes each of rebuttal. After that, I'll be moderating Q&A, including those which were already submitted to us, plus any that you pose via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So now for our panelists, we are pleased to welcome Ben Grief on behalf of the Yes campaign and Tino Rossi on behalf of the No campaign. Their complete bios were included in the invitation that you received, which is also posted on the homepage at our website. So in a nutshell, Ben Grief is campaign director for Evolve California. And they were founded with the goal of reforming Proposition 13 to provide more school funding. Proposition 15 is the culmination of a 7-year effort to bring this before voters. Per Ballotpedia, teachers' unions are the biggest campaign funder. And after we hear from Ben, we will hear from Tino Rossi, who heads the No on Prop 15 campaign coalition. And the key players in that coalition are organizations that are representing businesses and taxpayer interests. The California Business Roundtable is the biggest funder of the No campaign. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first panelist representing the Yes campaign, Ben Grief. Make the case for yes on Prop 15.
Thank you so much, Mimi, and thank you everyone else for joining us this afternoon and hearing about this really important and historic initiative. I just want to start out by talking about what this initiative really means for California and really how common sense it actually is. What Prop 15 does is providing billions of dollars for schools and our community services every year. But it will do this without increasing taxes on homeowners, on renters, or small businesses. And we should really ask ourselves, when was the last time we heard that, right? Everyone knows that year after year, we're being nickeled and dimed with local sales tax increases, bond measures, and parcel taxes to fund the things that we need in our communities. But, we have an opportunity now to generate $12 billion of stable, reliable revenue every year without increasing our taxes. And simply put, all Prop 15 will do is put our state on par with how the rest of the country taxes large commercial property. Only we will still have more protections than other states do for large commercial properties. We're going to maintain the low rate of 1%. So every large commercial property valued at over $3 million in California will simply have to pay fair market value in property taxes at the rate of 1%. Not the rate that they pay in other states, 2%, 3%, 4% that you see across the country, but just 1%. That's it. And because we've had this absurd loophole in our property tax system for 42 years, we've lost $150 billion from large commercial property owners being able to pay property taxes based on what their land was worth decades ago. I should also mention that 92% of this revenue is estimated to come from just 10% of commercial properties in California. So the claim that this is somehow a uniform tax on all business or that this is a tax on all commercial property owners is completely absurd. We can just look at examples right here in our area. The Salesforce Tower is paying property taxes at fair market value. The Transamerica Pyramid, not so much. We see example after example of really this system that we have perpetuating inequality within our commercial property tax system. Why should someone have to pay more taxes on their commercial property, not their home, this is their commercial property, when just because they purchased their property more recently than their competitor across the street? That's what we should be asking ourselves, because what the system we have now is just government regulation of the free market, right? It does nothing to foster entrepreneurship or economic growth. It provides a tax benefit for a small number of large commercial property owners that other folks who just recently purchased their property or started their business don't get to enjoy. That's what we're working to change here. We have a great example of in San Francisco, this store called Bus Fans for Bargains, right? They have a location that's only paying $33 per square foot for their property because it's based on when their property was worth $600,000 in 1977. Right? The property across the street is paying $467 per square foot. Now, how does that make any sense for us? So not only are we losing funds for our schools and public services that we need now more than ever. Not only are we increasing the tax burden on all of us in the form of local tax increases and everything else we have in this state, but we're also setting up an anti-competitive playing field for new commercial property owners. And so the idea that we would, defend this system that, again, no economist in the world would ever defend is, to me, something we really need to be thinking about when deciding how we want to vote on Prop 15. The other thing to mention is that this is local revenue. Right? This is revenue that is going to our local counties, our local cities, our local schools, and our local special districts, including fire districts. Right now we are going through an unprecedented event with all the wildfires that we're facing. And Prop 15 provides $390 million a year for fire districts at a time when we need it the most, and we will continue to need it into the future. So when you talk about a vote on Prop 15, this is a vote for money to help keep our communities safe without increasing our taxes. So again, to me, this is such a no-brainer, especially in this time. In Marin County, this is $5.5 million a year coming to fire districts. Right? That's a good amount of money. This is reliable, stable revenue. Because part of the problem with California not relying on reliable, stable commercial property tax money like they do everywhere else in this country is that we then have to rely on more volatile forms of taxation. We have to rely on income and capital gains taxes that go up and down with the market. That doesn't make any sense. We should be tapping into stable, reliable forms of taxation like the commercial property tax. So there are just so many ways to slice this. We certainly have issues that we need to address here in California. Certainly there are other tax reforms that we need to take a look at. But really, in this time of unprecedented economic downturn that all of our local governments are going to be facing moving forward, why do we not want to just make this simple adjustment that, again, doesn't increase our taxes? That's what we have to be asking ourselves. And the opposition is touting all kinds of things that this is going to cause all businesses to leave, again, because only the vast majority of the money is coming from just 10% of commercial property owners in California. That's a complete lie. We use Disneyland as an example. Think for a moment. Is Disneyland going to move because they have to pay fair market value property taxes like they have to at Disney World in Florida? Absolutely not. Are their prices going to go up because they have to pay a little bit more in property taxes? Absolutely not, because prices are based on the market, not based on the property taxes that are being paid by a landlord. Disneyland ticket prices have gone up 1,800% in the last 40 years. That's fine because prices are based on the market. I also want to close by mentioning Chevron. If anyone takes a look at Chevron, they know the gas prices at Chevron are not the cheapest around, but they're saving $100 million a year in property taxes. And so the idea that somehow there'll be any correlation for the cost of goods and services when we make this common sense change is completely false. So I'll let Tino go now, and then we can talk more.
Great. Thank you, Ben. So now we'll hear from Tino Rossi, representing the No on Prop 15 campaign. Tell us why voters should oppose Prop 15.
Thanks, Mimi. And I'm going to pick up where Ben left off. Ben did a really good job in explaining where this money goes. And it is local control. We've never disputed that. This is going to go to cities, counties, special districts, and school boards if the initiative passes. And so I want to start off with the question, if that's the case, and this money is so guilt-free and isn't a tax on consumers or small businesses, why is the League of California Cities, the California State Association of Counties, the California School Boards Association, and the California Special Districts Association all decline to endorse the initiative? And the answer is very simple. As you start to peel away at this guilt-free image that Ben's painted, you start to realize the initiative has several flaws and implications beyond the original intent of the drafters of this initiative had for generating this revenue. Let's start with who's going to pay this tax. Ben asserts that it's only properties worth $3 million or more. I'd like to point to the text of the initiative in this paragraph on my screen that says that, in fact, properties under $3 million will be subject to this reassessment. And here's why. The initiative clearly states that if you're a commercial or industrial property owner and you own more than $3 million in aggregate total of commercial or industrial properties, all of your properties are subject to reassessment under the initiative. Let me explain. If you own a building, 3 buildings worth $1.1 million, upon first glance, you may think all 3 of your properties are safe from reassessment. However, this subdivision of the initiative clearly states that because those 3 properties total in excess of $3 million, each of them would be subject to reassessment, even though their individual value is less than $3 million. Here's why I start with that. Ben says that only 10% of commercial properties in the state of California will pay 92% of this tax revenue. Quite simply, it's impossible to state that. We have no understanding of which properties will be reassessed under Prop 15 because we've got to go out first and reassess properties, determine their current market value, and then determine if the owners of a building worth under $3 million own any other buildings in any other county worth an aggregate total of $3 million. This is a complex, convoluted way to tax properties, and it's why the California Assessors Association, the organization representing, the nonpartisan organization representing 58 county assessors, have all said this is not going to be a difficult initiative to implement, but impossible. So let's start there. 10%, that we can't rely on that number. There's simply no existing statewide database to show which properties would be exposed to this initiative. Let's take that a step further. In California, we surveyed small business owners through the National Federation of Independent Business and found that 76% of small business owners rent the property they operate in, meaning they don't own the building, but they own their small business. Nearly every single commercial and industrial lease in California has what's called a triple net lease. In these triple net leases, landlords designate the responsibility of increases in insurance, maintenance, and yes, property taxes to the tenant of the building. And oftentimes, these pass-throughs on property taxes are not baked into the rent. They're in fact an annual bill. So a small business owner just receives a bill and says, this is the increase in property taxes, you'll be subject to pay them. Ben describes many of these large corporations that have not been paying their fair share of property taxes. Take the US Bank Tower in Los Angeles, for example. They're getting ready to sell their building. That building will be reassessed. And one would think US or whoever owns that bank is going to be exposed to a massive new property tax bill. Well, US Bank stated 73% of that building is leased to small business owners, meaning when that new property tax bill comes, it will be broken up and distributed out to small business owners who will pay this tax. And Ben and I are going to have a lot of back and forth on who's going to pay this tax. And sometimes I think it's best that we simply listen to the folks who are in these impacted constituencies. And the NFIB just recently surveyed their members again and found that 96% of small business owners oppose Proposition 15. That's because they've read their lease, they understand how this will impact them, and they're going to have a huge tax liability to pay at a time when they've dipped into their savings account, taken loans to stay afloat, and laid off employees. Simply put, this is a tax on small businesses, and any tax on any business in California is ultimately paid by one person, and that is the consumer. I'm not saying property taxes are directly related to anything. All I'm saying is it is a market indication. And when we say the market's going to correct itself, any small business owner, any business owner is going to consider an increase in property tax as a market factor and adjust their prices accordingly. It's an input cost versus cost of goods and services. Very basic economics. The other thing I want to outline that's very concerning is a couple of conversations related to how this impacts local governments. Mimi at the top outlined that this money will not start flowing until 2025. So any idea that this is money that we need now and it's a vote for COVID relief or pandemic relief is false, because this money is coming in 5 years. And now's not only not the right time to increase taxes, but it does nothing in the end to alleviate some of our current budget shortfalls. I know that costs, one of their criteria for accepting positions on taxes is equitable. And I want to spend just my last minute and a half talking about equity. I know that's very important to this group. You know, the LAO is nonpartisan. It's not from my campaign, not from Ben's campaign. Has found that more than 20 counties are going to lose money under Proposition 15. That's quite simply not equitable. When you're looking at addressing inequality, when you're looking at providing local governments with resources, we can't pass a $12.5 billion tax increase and then leave more than 20 rural counties behind. The LAO very clearly states that some counties will lose money. The California Assessors Association similarly did a study and found the same thing. And it's because there are no large-scale commercial or industrial buildings to reassess in some of these counties. And the new tax breaks to all business owners outweighs that. So there's lots to get into. I'm excited to talk about how this impacts agriculture, which one thing I want you to take away, this 100% definitely impacts agriculture. It's overwhelmingly obvious that it does. But I know Ben and I are teed up for a great conversation. And in closing, this is a non-equitable tax increase at the wrong time. Local governments recognize that this does nothing for them. Small businesses will be absolutely devastated by this tax increase, and consumers will pay the cost. And right now is the wrong time for the single largest property tax increase in state history. And that's exactly what Prop 15 is. It's the largest property tax increase in state history. So we're hoping you consider a no vote. So with that, Mimi, I think I'm at 6:58, 6:59, and 7 minutes.
Awesome. I really appreciate your paying attention to the time suggestion. So with that, you now each have 3 minutes to rebut or correct or clarify anything that you heard stated today by your opposing panelist. If you're disputing a factual statement, please be specific as to what you think is the more accurate statement and perhaps the source of your assertion. So I'm going to let you take it from here, Ben.
Great. Thanks so much, Mimi. There's a lot to respond to there, but the first thing I do want to clarify is certainly this revenue will start coming in around 2023, so not till 2025. And I think we also should take a quick moment to kind of look at, do we really think our state is going to be out of the woods in 5 years on this unprecedented pandemic-induced recession that we're in? The answer is not. So that's just a bad way to think about this. We're going to suffer cuts. We're going to be asked to have temporary tax increases. And so the idea is, do we want those tax increases to be permanent? And do we want the cuts to be permanent? Or do we want to just put a common sense solution forward to have long-term reliable revenue coming in? I always chuckle when we talk about, oh, well, this is going to be so bad for small businesses. Rents are based on the market, right? If this corporate loophole in our property tax law was keeping commercial rents down, we would have the lowest rents in the country. But as everyone knows, we do not, right? Just think about that for just a moment. We do not have the lowest rents in the country, despite the fact that a small number of large commercial property owners are paying decades-old property taxes. Very important to remember that. I think, the other thing to talk about is just so much misinformation is coming out, from the opposition on this. For starters, 100 words of their ballot argument were removed by a judge because they were so misleading. This is the ballot argument that's supposed to be factual and goes out to every voter. 100 words had to be removed because the opposition knows that they can't win on the merits of their argument because this is so common sense. The opposition also knows that they cannot find an actual example of a small business owner that would be negatively impacted by this. They had a great ad with a barbershop owner from Sacramento who was like, oh, well, this is going to put me out of business. We looked into that, and that barbershop owner was in a building that was assessed at $200,000, well below the $3 million value. I mean, so either they can't be bothered to find an accurate example, or there are none. So that's something we should really be thinking about. The campaign also came out with something today, and I'm glad Tino didn't mention this, about solar, right? They are trying to claim in an ad that this will hurt solar. It will not, right? They're saying, oh, this is going to increase taxes on solar farms. The solar industry is not opposed to this because they already have protections that were just extended in the last legislative session. So this is what we're talking about from the opposition here, is there's lies, there's scare tactics, there's no factual evidence to really back up any assertion that they have. We have our own studies. A Beacon Economics report just came out last week that says that this will not affect small businesses, that this will not even affect those folks with triple net leases. What I do want to spend the remainder of my time talking about right now is that this is the largest tax cut for small businesses in a generation. We are going to eliminate the first $500,000 of tax on personal business equipment. For a restaurant, that means you have to count up every year your knives, pots and pans, tables and chairs, refrigerators, ovens, all of that, and pay a tax on that. That's a perfect example of how we've had to nickel and dime individuals and small business owners to make up for the fact that we have a ridiculous property tax system for commercial property. We're going to eliminate that tax for all small businesses in California. And so to oppose Prop 15 is also to oppose the greatest tax cut for small businesses in a generation. That's something we should be very aware of.
Okay, thank you, Tina. So now we are going to proceed to questions and answers.
Would you
Again,
mind if I use my 3 minutes to
Oh,
rebut?
I'm sorry, my fault.
Okay, Ben's just
Jumped
loading
the gun.
in. I want to make sure I have a chance
Thank
to
you,
respond.
Tina. Yes, please use your 3 minutes and maybe a couple extra seconds of penalty from me. There you
No,
go.
it's okay. I think I can get it done in 3 minutes. Let's start with the
Okay,
small
go.
business examples. I encourage you all to read a San Francisco Chronicle article and the KTVU news clip that came out last week. Lori Thompson, Executive Director, the Golden Gate Restaurant Association, outlined 4 different case studies of small businesses that would be impacted. As for our barbershop ad, this is a funny one for us because the proponents tried to call us out. I'm sharing our release here. They actually got the address wrong in their press release of the barbershop they cited. We went back and pulled the assessment records of the barbershop. Turns out, yeah, Ben's right. His barbershop was not worth more than $3 million. The problem was, again, the person who owned his barbershop and the building there owned $3 million or more in commercial or industrial property, meaning that barbershop's going to get reassessed, and he recognizes that. So this idea there are no small business examples, ABC 10 in San Diego just highlighted an immigrant small business owner who came to San Diego on ABC 10 that's going to be impacted because of their triple net lease. Again, Ben and I can get into as much back and forth as we want on small businesses. The National Federation of Independent Business, the California Small Business Association, the Family Business Association, California Chamber of Commerce, more than 125 local chambers of commerce representing more than 100,000 small businesses, all opposed to Prop 15. To say they don't understand their leases or there's no example, it's an insult to all of those hundreds of thousands of small business owners who recognize this property tax increase is going to fall on their shoulders. That's really what I want to spend my 3 minutes rebutting because, again, it goes back to sometimes the proponent's own misunderstanding of their initiative. I encourage you, go read the initiative. This idea that it's the largest tax cut in a generation for small business owners, I'll again point you to the actual text of the initiative. Very clearly, to qualify for the unlimited business personal property tax Ben just described, it clearly states you have to meet the definition of a small business. And point C on the definition of a small business in their initiative is the business owns real property located in California. 76% of businesses rent, they do not own. So they don't qualify for this generational, unlimited business personal property tax cut. So in terms of misleading, I'm not asking you to trust Ben or I. Go listen to the small businesses and the organizations that represent them. Go listen to agriculture, which the proponents, even though they admitted it in 2019, have continued to pretend like this initiative doesn't impact agriculture, despite the California Farm Bureau Federation, Western Growers. There's a long list of inaccuracies and misinterpretation of their own initiative. It's right here in front of you. I encourage you to read it. Small businesses and consumers are going to pay this. This idea that property taxes aren't a market indicator in determining costs. My question to Ben would be, if property taxes don't determine a business's ability to provide an affordable service, how do any of these big corporations have a competitive advantage? It can't be both that property taxes don't impact a company's ability to be competitive, and they also do. It's one or the other, and I think the proponents know the answer. So those are my 3 minutes. Looking forward to the rest of the debate.
Okay, thank you both. Now for question and answer, we want to get lots of Q&A answered on each side, and we hope to give equal time overall to both. That doesn't necessarily mean you get the same amount of time for each question, because some of the questions might be directed towards one of you or the other. If an answer goes on too long, I'll gently intervene. As a reminder for our participants, if you have a question you want to submit, use your Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And Kingston, who is off screen, will look at those and feed some of them, read some of them to us. So I'm going to start out with a question that comes from a completely different angle, which is, aren't pensions the elephant in the room? And if so, what does that imply about whether we should vote yes or no on Prop 15? So I'm going to ask Ben to answer that question first, and then Tina.
Yeah, so thanks for that question. like I was mentioning before, just because there's some cracks in our foundation doesn't mean we need to put out the fire, right? We need to put out the fire right now, right? There's a lot of things that we need to address. But right now, we have to figure out how are we going to raise the revenue that we need for our schools, for our communities, for our fire districts, without continually increasing taxes on individuals. That's what we need to do. I mean, the Sultan of Brunei is saving $6 million a year on 2 Beverly Hill hotels because he gets a tax break that he wouldn't get anywhere else in the world, right? That's what we're talking about right now. So we certainly have other things we need to fix and certainly have other things we need to address, but that doesn't mean that we can't close this loophole and put ourselves on par with how the rest of the country taxes large commercial property.
All right, Tino, do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any personal views on that. I think what we've more specifically decided as a campaign is we're not in the business of deciding, whether teachers deserve more money or don't deserve more money. But the elephant in the room is pension costs and the overwhelming liability that school boards and local governments have to 6-figure pensions. In fact, I was just reading something about the overwhelming exposure San Francisco County has to their large pension problems. The San Diego Union Tribune recently took a no position on Proposition 15 for this very issue. The Santa Rosa Press Democrat also took a no position on this issue for that very reason, because the truth is, for years and years and years, we've been told to increase taxes on ourselves, on our businesses, and our consumers for the promise that money makes it to the classroom. And quite frankly, California voters are leery. They're suspicious of where this money goes and the accountability behind these types of measures. We're talking about the single largest property tax increase in state history at a time when our state's facing a huge pension crisis. It's not hard for voters to draw the connection there. For me and Ben, I think we probably prefer to focus on the merits of the initiative and more about specifically where this goes. But pension's a huge problem, and no doubt some of this money is going to go to address that problem. And every dollar that goes towards pensions is a dollar that doesn't go to our fire districts. It doesn't go to our classrooms.
Okay. I'll ask one more question, then I'll prompt Kingston if he has anything from the question queue. Tino, this one goes to you first. Do you agree with the central premise of Ben's argument that California public schools need more money? And if so, what do you think is the best way to get it?
Listen, I think that tax reform in California is almost non-debatable. We have an issue. We're the 5th largest economy in the world, and we're here on a Zoom at 4:30 on a Monday talking about how to get our schools and communities the money they need. No doubt. Do I think that that's a problem that needs to be handled at the ballot box? No. I think the legislature, the initiative falls squarely on them to figure out our tax system. What I will say is Prop 13 has worked. Contrary to the belief that Prop 13 hasn't worked, it's continued to provide a certain steady stream of revenue to our local government and our schools. The data is overwhelming. It's been the most certainty and the most stable funding source our local government has. Ben talks about capital gains tax and personal income tax, extremely volatile forms of revenue. And I think that Prop 13 has continued to work. It's been the last protection businesses have to stay in California, the last protections that homeowners have to stay in California. And we forget that by keeping businesses in California, they're generating sales tax, they're generating building fees, all of these things that are a result of us continuing to have a competitive environment here in California will go away because of Prop 15. I think this initiative falls short on the central idea. We got to stop acting like $3 million is this only rich people have $3 million in property argument. We're in California. The real estate market here is extremely high. And I think 3 million is too low of a threshold, and too many consumers and small businesses get impacted by it.
I'd like to come back to that question later if time permits. Ben,
Could I respond?
what do you have to say about this?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting, a couple of things that Tino mentioned. One, to leave things up to the legislature as opposed to having folks in California vote and decide what they want. I think that is not the right thing to do. We can't trust what the legislature is going to do. I would much rather have these decisions be made by voters. And I would appreciate, but unfortunately this is not the world that we're living in, if folks could have accurate, fair information being brought by the other side. But the other side is probably waging the most dishonest campaign that I've ever heard. I wish there was time. I want to, respect this forum, but I wish I could sort of spend 20 minutes refuting almost everything that Tino has said. But I think it's just keeping it up with the legislature doesn't make any sense. And we agree, property taxes are stable. Property taxes are reliable. So why do we not tap into more of that revenue? Why are we continually forced to increase our own taxes, which is, many regressive, which are volatile, instead of doing what they do everywhere else? That's really what this is all about, right? And in terms of, what is going to be good for businesses, let's foster entrepreneurship. Let's foster new businesses. Let's do something to make it so we don't have so many vacant buildings. I talked about bus vans for bargains earlier, but part of the big issue with that is that building was vacant for decades because there is no incentive for the commercial property owner to do anything with that property, to develop it, to sell it, to rent it out, because they're paying property taxes from decades ago. If you let the free market work, which I hope we're all, free market folks here and believe in that, then we should let the free market work and not give these huge benefits to folks just because they owned the Transamerica Pyramid 40 years ago. And, Transamerica Pyramid going to fly up and leave? Is Disney going to leave? Is Chevron going to leave? Are Tahoe Ski Mountains going to leave? Are grocery stores and IKEA, are they going to leave? No, of course not. We're the 5th largest economy in the world. This is where the most people in this country live. Businesses are not going to leave. They want to be here. They want to sell to us. And just all of this sort of doom and gloom is just bizarre when that's factually inaccurate, right? Because Salesforce Tower, Facebook, Apple's second campus, all the land Google is buying in San Jose, the job creators of today and tomorrow are not benefiting from this whatsoever. It's a small number of large commercial property owners that are getting a tax break that they wouldn't get anywhere else, including the President of the United States. He owns 30% of 555 California. So our state has decided to say, you know what, you, sir, maybe he's not as rich as we thought he was, but he's still very wealthy. He could pay his fair share of property taxes like he does in all the other properties he owns all across the country. But instead, we've decided as a state to give him a special tax break that he wouldn't get anywhere else, that just nickels and dimes us and makes it so we're 39th in the nation in education funding, which as the 5th largest economy in the world, we should be ashamed of.
Thank you. Okay, Kingston. If your internet is functioning properly, could you read us a question from the question queue or summarize it if there are several that are the same? Are you with us, Kingston? Are you muted, unmuted, not there? Okay, I will proceed, and I can also monitor the Q&A queue. Let's see, I would like to know the following, which factually, I'd like some guidance for all of us. Do properties under this proposition, do they get assessed at the current use or at the highest potential use? And what happens to properties that are, for example, zoned as commercial, residential, or mixed use? And this has a whole lot of implications. For example, if you have a mixed use zoning and there is housing on it, would we end up potentially having a loss of housing because the property gets assessed at commercial valuation? And would this, for example, end up consolidating ownership of properties in the hands of the biggest players who can afford the higher taxes? I don't know if Tina or Ben, one of you want to jump in there with what you know about this?
Yeah, I'll go first because Ben's going to like that I'm going to probably agree with a lot of the things he's going to say, which is, let's be explicit here. Residential properties are not subject to reassessment under Proposition 15. Mixed use properties are not subject to reassessment under Proposition 15. The initiative very clearly prioritizes use over zoning. And so because even if they're zoned commercial residential, because they're used for residential, they will not be subject to reassessment under the initiative. Only properties, regardless of zoning, used for commercial or industrial purposes that are over 3 million or are owned by someone with an aggregate of 3 million or more will be subject to reassessment. Here's where Ben and I will probably disagree. We do believe that that actually does de-incentivize the building of new housing. And here's why. Because the initiative does not reassess residential or mixed use properties, it's actually in a local government's best interest to continue to incentivize commercial and industrial use property, they can generate more revenue off of it. I mean, Ben described a 10-year recession we're going to be facing, and local governments are going to look for every opportunity they can to generate revenue. And the more they can keep industrial and commercial use buildings in the taxation wheelhouse, the more they're going to do it. Simply put, residential isn't going to make them as much money as commercial and industrial. It's why the California Building Industry Associations, the Housing and Jobs Coalition, the Better Bay Area Housing Network all agree that this initiative is bad for housing. So I'll let Ben jump in, but want to be clear, we've never implied that homeowners are impacted by this initiative, and we do stand firm in agreement with the proponents that residential will not be impacted November 3rd by Prop 15.
Thank you. Do you need to add anything to that, Ben, or shall I move on to the next question?
No, I certainly love to. I want to, thank Tino. Tino, I wish you were running the entire campaign, right? I wish you wrote the ballot argument that implied that home-based businesses would be reassessed by this, because you didn't. Unfortunately, some other folks in your campaign did, and it was removed by a judge because it was false completely. And I wish you were really running the ad campaign right now, that every single ad you put in there implies somehow that this is going to affect residential property, because that's the only way you can win, because this is so common sense. When we're talking about generating revenue that we desperately need for our schools, for our fire districts, for our community services, without taxing people like that idea. That makes sense, right? And when they know that actually it's only a small number of commercial properties that are going to have to pay this burden, they like that too. So you just keep throwing, I wish you could continue to say that. I want to see an ad with you on TV saying this doesn't affect residential property. I would commend you if you did that. But unfortunately, we know that's not going to happen, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to win, unfortunately. So what we really should be talking about now is what the current situation is and how that already incentivized the chase for building commercial property. Because the only revenue that our local governments have been able to count on has been the sales tax. And so that's why we see more commercial property having been built over the last several decades, because they don't get reliable, stable commercial property tax money. So we have to build Targets, we have to build IKEAs, we have to build other big box stores that are going to generate revenue. I don't know if anyone here has ever been to Emeryville. It's a very interesting case study in this. Emeryville was sort of reinvented from a very industrial area to a more commercial area that we know of now in the 1980s, after Prop 13 passed. And they smartly were like, this is the best way that we can generate revenue. It's by not creating housing, but by actually creating more places where we can generate the sales tax. So that's already the situation that we have, and governments are going to be chasing after that because they don't have reliable property tax money. But if you generate $500 million every year for the city of San Francisco, they have less of a need to look for other forms of revenue. It's all about common sense. It's about taxation that makes sense. It's not about taxing and nickel and diming individuals with higher forms of sales tax. And that's what Prop 15 is all about.
Okay, thank you, Ben.
I'm sorry, just 25 seconds. I just want to make it clear, to Ben's point, I want to maintain transparency. We have never, not in one TV commercial, you can head to knowonprop15.org right now. We've never said homeowners are impacted by Prop 15. The last line in our commercials very clearly states, we believe homeowners are next, which we do believe, we have stood by, but we have never once asserted that residential properties are impacted. So seems like a small distinction, but in terms of accuracy and honesty, it's a big one. Because Prop 15 doesn't impact residential, and we haven't said as much. But we do believe that homeowners are next. So I just want to throw that in there, Mimi.
Well, actually, that was a very timely interjection, Tino, because our question queue from people who are calling in to participate or zooming in has a couple questions on that front. And I know that Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association is part of your coalition of opposing. So I guess the question is there's allegations that this is the camel's nose under the tent, but is there actually any evidence for that? Or is that just surmising that, once you start chipping away at it, that we'll start taking bricks out?
I'd say both. I think it started, at the original 1978 Proposition 13, it was very clear the two main proponents of the Yes campaign, CTA and SEIU, hate Prop 13 from the moment it's passed. They wanted to repeal it in all its entirety. In fact, I can even cite this, and this is why it goes from just this idea of in the camel's nose to a larger, statement. CTA, SEIU, all part, the two main funders of this initiative, sued to block the implementation of Proposition 13, which include the protections for residential properties. In 1991, the League of Women Voters, also a large proponent of the proponents campaign, engaged in a similar. And then most recently, we had the president of the United Teachers Association of Los Angeles talking about, once Prop 15 passes, we're going to come back with another initiative for Prop 13 and another and another and another. The proponents have been vocal. The main funders of their campaign, the main supporters of their campaign have been vocal about the idea that this was never supposed to be something we had in California. We should be on par with the rest of the country. And when they say the rest of the country, most other states reassess residential property on a year-to-year basis. That may be what the proponents want. I'd strongly discourage that. The Washington Post in April had a fantastic analysis of the racial discrimination that happens in year-to-year assessment for communities of color. The fact is, Prop 13, this is the camel's nose. This is the first step. California, quite frankly, has never met any initiative where they stopped at first base, and we think the evidence, it's available, it's overwhelming. The proponents and the supporters have said Prop 13 is a bad deal for California, and that includes residential protections.
So Ben, I'm sure you're going to want to reply to that, so go for it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mimi. When Prop 13 passed in 1978, in the 2 years after that, there were 43 copycat pieces of legislation that passed all across the country. But not one of them included commercial property, because that makes absolutely no sense. Right? 43 copycat measures for residential property. And folks probably know people in other states, that, oh yeah, we have some sort of residential property tax protection here, but they don't have that for commercial property. So this whole idea that, oh, we don't want to do what other states do, it's like, yeah, we do. Go to Texas and ask them about their parcel taxes. Parcel taxes don't exist there. That's an invention of California to get around the fact that we've lost $150 billion over the last 40 years by not taxing large commercial properties at fair market value. So, this whole idea of camel's nose under the tent, it's just a scare tactic, right? And I do definitely agree with Tino. Look at their ads. If this is all just about commercial property, then they shouldn't mention homeowners once, but they do in the ads, because it's the only way they can win is by scaring folks to think they're going to come after them. Prop 13, it passed with over 64% of the vote in 1978. It's even more popular now. So not only is there no organization that it's seriously considering, you can cite a 1991 Supreme Court case that the League of Women Voters were part of. If that's what you have, go by all means, great. But that's actually not has any bearing on what's going on in 2020, because no organization is actually talking about changing Prop 13. And even if they did, it would be the biggest fight you could imagine, because you would have to convince homeowners who are voters to tax themselves. So who would do that? That makes absolutely no sense, right? What we're doing is we're saying, aren't you tired of getting nickel and dimed? Shouldn't we put ourselves on par with what everyone else does? Shouldn't we make the Disneys, the Chevrons, the Donald Trumps, the Sultans of Brunei pay fair market value and property taxes? That's all this is about. Everything else is a scare tactic. Please don't believe it. If you don't support the idea of commercial properties being taxed at fair market value, that's certainly one thing. But the idea that this is somehow a slippery slope towards taking on the residential side is completely factually inaccurate.
So another question that keeps coming up has to do with the costs of implementation, which include the municipalities having to hire commercial assessors, and also possibly fund litigation over assessments that get contested. There's also some money that's supposed to come from the states that's lent at the beginning to help them staff up and prepare for all of this, but it's loaned. And so the question that is asked, and I think it was touched on briefly before in Tino's presentation, but the question comes up about the extent to which some locations are going to be in the hole by the time they're done with the overhead of administering this. So Ben, would you like to comment on that, please?
Yeah, I would just like to say all counties are going to receive extra revenue. What Tino brings up is the point that we're providing a tax cut for businesses that apparently the opposition doesn't like. And so now they're standing up for counties and saying, oh, well, we're going to lose money. It's like, well, I mean, you can't be sort of, against tax cuts, but at the same time not want local
Well,
government.
but the question is not whether they're getting extra revenue, but whether the extra revenue doesn't keep up with the extra costs that go with achieving the revenue.
But it certainly will. The great thing about property taxes is not only are they stable and reliable, but over the last 40 years, property values in California have increased by on average 7% every year, right? That's an enormous amount. That's certainly more than we can expect to get from the stock market, which we're, some folks in our state are also trying to project a rosy 7% increase every year coming from, income and capital gains from the stock market. But in actuality, there will be funds to implement this, and then there will be money generated at the beginning, but also over time, because there's more and more money every year as land values continue to increase in California. So the other portion is all schools are guaranteed increased revenue. And we're funding schools through the local control funding formula in this country. And our initiative also funds schools through the local control funding formula, which ensures that areas that have more students that, come from low income backgrounds, mostly rural, will be receiving the majority of this education funding. So the idea that somehow folks in rural counties are going to be hurt by this is completely off base. I think the other thing about implementation and all this, we're the home to Silicon Valley, right? We can figure out how to do this. The idea that somehow this is something that's too hard for us to figure out, but they can do it in Dallas and Houston and New York and Chicago and Miami, but we can't figure out how to do it here, is completely absurd. We will figure out how to do it. It's just do what they do everywhere else. It's not that difficult. We put a man on the moon, but we can't regularly reassess non-residential commercial property in San Francisco and San Jose. That's completely ridiculous. And just the fact that is even talked about, I find completely offensive when we talk about what we're facing in terms of budget deficits right now during this COVID-19 crisis.
Gino, do you have a view on this issue of whether there might actually be some losers here?
Well, let's not trust me, Mimi. Let's go to the Legislative Analyst's Office. Again, nonpartisan, non-biased opinion on this. And let's read page 2 of their assessment. And oh, wait, right here. Not all governments would be guaranteed new money. Some in rural areas may end up losing because of lower taxes on business equipment. Ben talked about only facts being in the voter information guide. Let's go to page 22. And let's look at not all governments would be guaranteed new money. Some in rural areas may end up losing money because of lower taxes. Okay, now let's go look at the assessors. And the assessors were asked to participate in a joint informational hearing back with the assembly. They wrote a letter. Here it says the cost to implement's $1 billion. $1 billion. So now you're talking about an $11.5 billion tax increase being 10.5. They say quite plainly and quite clearly the implementation would require a trained workforce that doesn't exist. They talk in bullet 3 about this confusing 3 million aggregate that I led off my discussion talking about, and how there's no statewide database for them to be able to accurately implement the initiative. And then lastly, they found the same thing we did. They asked the 27 county assessors in rural counties what would happen if you implemented Prop 15, and they found it would trigger negative growth in small and rural counties. In fact, I'll challenge you to do this. Go to the proponent's website, Yes on Prop 15, go to the bottom, and they have a nice section where you can find out what your community will get from Proposition 15. There's 58 counties in California. There's only 27 listed on their website. That's because the math doesn't look very good for the rest of those counties. And again, I'm for transparency. Ben, we may disagree on things, but when I agree with you, I will agree with you. Schools are guaranteed money. When they say rural counties will lose money, they are talking about at the local government level. But here's why that isn't as rosy as it sounds. The reason schools are guaranteed money is because the state, through local control or community control funding formula, get to redistribute that property tax revenue. And for the first time in the history of California, these rural counties are going to generate property tax revenues that will go to other county school districts by redistribution via the state. So this is very clear. The LAO, the California Assessors Association, the Voter Information Guide, all back up, Mimi, what you described, which is that some counties, especially rural, smaller counties, will be negative net losers under the initiative.
Here are 2 more questions that kind of dovetail. One of them is from one of our directors, Doug Kelly, who asks, if we make a San Francisco business go from $33 a square foot to paying $406 a square foot in taxes, won't he go out of business? shouldn't the first rule of public service be no harm, do no harm? And the other related question posed is that the premise that the cost of increased property taxes will undoubtedly be passed on to someone. And this particular person says, could we have Ben speak to that, please?
So the question is, would this somehow harm the commercial property owner from having to pay, that's been paying 40-year-old property tax rates?
Well, the question is, if someone's taxes are going to go up, aren't they going to try to pass it through in some way, or does it risk for a small business, let's say, that has benefited from very low property tax on that property? Can they actually handle a big increase as that rolls through the income statement of their business?
Well, that's why I like the Bus Vans for Bargains example, is because this was an empty building. This is an empty building downtown San Francisco. The building across the street is valued at $8 million. And so if Bus Vans for Bargains has to, be forced to pay fair market value property taxes like their neighbor and is unable to make that work, they could always sell that building for $8 million. But the fact of the matter is that the vast majority of commercial properties in California are valued at less than $3 million. And again, most commercial properties are paying their fair share already. It's only a small number of large commercial properties that are being assessed at decades-old rates. Because we talk about Salesforce Tower, we talk about Facebook and Google and all these other things, but then there's also been the change of ownership, and that regularly reassesses. And so this is a situation we have now where what happens when your building is sold and you're a small business tenant, right? That could be happening at any time. And then all of a sudden, you're one of these pass-through leases, you would be having to pay much higher property taxes. That is our current system. So if we talk about certainty for our businesses, how does that provide any certainty for any small business? We need to establish certainty by having large commercial property owners pay fair market value of property taxes and be reassessed every 3 years. We're not even saying assess every year, we're just saying every 3 years.
Another question that is posed here is, is there any possibility that the local taxes that are now being assessed, for example, here in Marin, we have a lot of school parcel taxes. Is there any chance that they're going to go away, or is this essentially all incremental, and that the taxpayer who feels overburdened really doesn't get any relief from this? Ben, do you have a thought about that?
Yeah, well, I understand.
By the way, posed by our director, Karsten Anderson.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah. My understanding is that Measure M is on the ballot, which would, extend a current parcel tax. And, this is the only way right now we have to fund our schools and our public services. It's just by continuing to tax ourselves. But what we noticed with all of these things is there's always a sunset clause. So when we have reliable, stable revenue coming from large commercial property owners, that is when we will not need to see so much nickel and diming. Because right now we're talking $150 billion we've lost over the last 40 years. We're talking $12 billion a year coming in. And, maybe, Tino, getting $10 million, ever having to pay $1 billion, doesn't work out for you, but I would take that $10 billion right now in our current situation. So, this is something where we've continued to be nickel and dime, and voters, I feel rightly so, are starting to just say, no, this doesn't work.
I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no, I would just say, back in March, what we found is 39% of local revenue measures passed, right? This is prior to COVID, we lost that because people are tired of being nickel and dime. So how are we going to fund our services? How are we going to fight our fires? How are we going to make sure that our schools can go back in a safe manner? Because this all costs more money. So how are we going to do that? Well, the best way to do that is to do what they do everywhere else and fairly tax large commercial property, still at that 1% rate, which will remain one of the lowest in the country.
Mimi, the answer is no. I think what Ben said there very longly is no, the parcel taxes are not going to disappear on January 1st, 2020. If Prop 15 passes, your sales tax isn't going to decrease by 1.5%. The personal income tax rate isn't going to decrease The answer is no. This is going to be layered on top of every other local tax. It's going to be an increased burden to the consumer, to the taxpayer. We already have an affordability crisis here in California, and we continue to tax and spend without accountability. Ben mentions 39% failed in March. I'd also add that Measure EE, which was a parcel tax in Los Angeles, was overwhelmingly rejected by Los Angeles Unified School District voters because they recognize that the issue isn't additional revenue, it's accountability with how it's spent in terms of administrative costs, pension costs, all of those things. We have a severe issue here. We want to be efficient with our resources, and the reality is Prop 15 is the largest property tax increase in state history, right on top of every other tax we're already paying here in California. We have an uncompetitive business climate, and this is only going to make it worse for consumers and for business owners here in the state.
Okay, I have a question. Tino, would you explain to our audience what is the Dell fix? And the Dell fix, do you know what I'm talking about? Okay.
And I like talking about this.
Let me finish with the question, please. Would your group support it? And could you also talk about why we haven't seen it come out of the legislature?
Wow, that's a great question. And I'm happy to announce that for the fourth time since Proposition 13 passed, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, the California Business Roundtable, and the California Taxpayers Association sponsored a fix to the Dell issue. In fact, this year, Assemblymember Bates carried a bill for us. We wanted to fix this issue. We know it's an inequity in Prop 13. We recognize it's an issue.
Explain what it is.
So there's a workaround of Prop 13. We're based on LLCs and the way you transfer property. And this is called the Dell rule because Michael Dell first figured it out in the code. He could transfer property without it, quote unquote, being a change of ownership, and they could continue with their property tax base. So many folks believed it was a way for large corporations to avoid paying their share of taxes once the property was reassessed. We wholeheartedly agree with that. And you can look right now on Assembly Bill Tracks. Member Bates sponsored a bill this year, and there were two main opponents of that legislation, the California Teachers Association and SEIU, because the fact is they know they don't want to fix that loophole. It damages their reason for going after Proposition 13. Again, don't trust my word. Go look at the bill. Look who sponsored it. Look who opposed it. We've tried 4 times, the groups supporting our initiative or opposing this initiative, to fix that rule and have been met with fierce opposition by the special interests promoting Proposition 15.
So Ben, respond to that, please, particularly the allegation that the teachers in the SEIU are responsible for killing the Dell rule fix.
Sure. Well, since I'm not a SEIU member or a teachers association member, all I can say is, that's why, again, I was refuting Tino's idea that we should leave this up to the legislature, because we just can't. You can't leave things up to Sacramento. There's lots of special interests all over the place. So that's why let's vote on this here. If this is something that was, so important to the opposition, then where's their initiative to close this loophole? That would have been a great idea. Put that on. It's like, oh, if you want to close loopholes, let's do this. But instead, they don't. They're instead going to spend, tens of millions of dollars, about $100 million, trying to scare people into thinking that this is somehow going to come after their homes, that this is somehow going to increase the cost of goods and services, and this is somehow going to cause businesses to leave California, which we know is just untrue. I haven't mentioned that Dell loophole. I'm glad you brought it up. It's a perfect example. There's another example in San Francisco. The Twitter building was recently purchased for $900 million, but it's still being taxed based on a value of less than $400 million, right? Prop 15 will take care of that, right? That doesn't make any sense. And that is just, again, a way that we're defunding our services and increasing the tax burden on all of us.
Okay. I think this might be our last question here. Ben, if it looks like the polling on this is very close. The last I saw, the Yes campaign was ahead by a smidge, but certainly wasn't in a position to be exhaling very fast. If Proposition 15 fails, is there a plan B, and what's plan B?
Well, I'd like to think that we're going to win, that's really with 5 weeks left. That's just what we're focused on. But I think we have to think about what are the smart, common sense ways that we can raise revenue. And this is it. We have the highest income tax in the country. We have the highest sales tax in the country. And we've mentioned a lot here about how we're nickel and dime at the local level. So what can we do to raise the revenue that we need in this unprecedented time to make sure that we can have kids go back to school in a safe way, so we can make sure we're prepared to fight the wildfires in the best way that we possibly can? And that's doing this.
So, Tino, I have a different question for you. And that is, can you tell us why you said that the school boards have not supported this? Is that the majority of school boards or just a little subset? And if so, why not?
That's a good question. Again, it's the California School Boards Association. They've taken a neutral position. They've declined to endorse. I want to be precise with that language.
Okay.
And the reason I don't even want to speculate for them. That's a question for the School Boards Association. Okay. We think lots of organizations statewide are realizing this money's not guilt-free, and the tax comes from consumers and small businesses. So maybe that's it.
Okay, and I failed to register the distinction there, that failed to and take a position. Do you have anything to say about that, Ben?
You know, I think that's an important position. Some earlier Tino mentioned, statewide organizations that have not taken a position. It's important. They're not opposed. Certainly not. The League of Cities or the League of California Counties or the School Board Association, certainly not opposed to this. And there's a big difference when we think about all the folks that are on the yes side and then who's on the no side. I think that's more what we should be talking about, not those folks that decided just to stay out of this.
Thank you. Okay, so we're now down to the grand finale here. You each get a minute-ish for your closing pitch as to sort of your take-home message, and also make sure, if you intend to do so, to tell voters where they can go for more information or to get involved. Why don't we start with you, Ben?
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mimi, for organizing this. Thank you all for being here. Tino, it's great to talk to you as always. What this comes down to is just common sense. That's all this is. This is this rare opportunity that we have to actually fund our schools and local services without increasing taxes on us. You will never hear that from any other campaign, but that's what the God's honest truth is for this. This is something that every other place in the country does, and this is something that we can rely on this revenue, not just a temporary parcel tax or bond measure, but we can rely on this revenue in the future. And it's coming from those large commercial property owners, those wealthy investors that can most afford to pay. And the opposition is just using scare tactics. There's no evidence that property taxes have any correlation with the cost of goods and services. There's no evidence that one commercial property owner is getting up and move to another state because of this, and especially there's no evidence that, so the nice list that Tino put together of things from decades ago, every time anyone mentioned Prop 13, there's absolutely no evidence that anyone is going to run a campaign or could ever think about winning a campaign to change anything on the residential side of Prop 13. Prop 15 is simply closing a loophole that most folks didn't even realize was part of the original Prop 13.
Okay, Tino.
Let's start with Prop 13. 1978, 64% voters approved it. I think it's insulting that we would infer they didn't know what they were voting on. It's very clearly stated in the ballot title and summary, this would protect residential, commercial, or industrial property. So let's start there. Folks like Prop 13 because they actually do know what it does. They know it creates certainty in our state. It provides stable revenue sources for our local governments, and it keeps businesses and jobs here. Pepperdine University completed a study. 120,000 private sector job losses would be lost because of Proposition 15. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, in cooperation with former Speaker Willie Brown, put out a survey, an op-ed detailing how the 23% of minority-owned small businesses in the state would disproportionately suffer because of Prop 15. And all of that comes back to a central point. Any idea that California can generate $11.5 billion out of thin air, and it is not paid in the form of higher goods and services, is disconnected from the economic transition of goods and services. Simply put, Proposition 15 is the single largest property tax increase in the history of California. It will affect small businesses, it will impact agriculture, and ultimately it will lead to higher costs of goods and services at a time when Californians can least afford it. If you want to find out more about the several flaws we've outlined in the initiative, learn more about the growing bipartisan coalition of organizations and electeds, I encourage you to visit noonprop15.org. I'll close by saying thank you, Mimi. Thank you to Cost. This has been a wonderful forum. I always appreciate the opportunity to chat with Ben. Very passionate. I really just enjoy the opportunity to let voters know the two sides of this issue and make up their own minds sometime before November 3rd with ballots being mailed here in the next week. So thank you to everyone. Thanks, Ben. We'll see you here shortly.
Thank you. And participants, stick with me for just one more minute here. So first I want to thank our panelists and our participants. This was, I thought, a lively forum. Really totally enjoyed it. Appreciate the time you spent on it. And I'm glad that the Zoom worked okay. I want to mention that a video will be posted to our website, I think by midweek. We tried to keep this forum today intimate and local as a special opportunity for our supporters. But we hope that a lot of people statewide will take a look at what has transpired here today, because I think it's a little bit different from the typical forum. And then meanwhile, to all of you, including our panelists as well as our participants, please send us your feedback. We would very much appreciate your suggestions about what worked well and what you would do differently. And also if you have any suggestions for a future cost-hosted Zoom event topic, or a forum that involves a number of different people or not, or something educational, let us know. And we're always happy to have donations and volunteers. Thank you for joining us. Bye.